Premium light. Some drink it because they're responsible. What? Others just love the taste.
Thanks very much. Thank you for coming. I know you came to hear about gametocytes. But for that, you must look at that first link, though. It's a cracker. I wanted to show it in Thailand, but was, in view of the current political situation, was dissuaded from doing something. It is a cracker. Really. That slide was to remind, I certainly most of you have seen it. Just after the last scene, I turned around and my family were consistently predominantly, in fact, entirely females, and every single one of them was synchronized sobbing. You know, but when you move a bit further down in size, into different areas of nature, things are not quite so straightforward. And this is the male of the black widow spider, and the male has to be very sensitive, because if he approaches the female when she has not had a meal and is slightly grumpy, and I work in Thailand, and there's a period between 11:30 and 12 o'clock in the day when you absolutely don't talk to women unless they've had rice. If the black widow hasn't had its lunch, then it prefers eating the male rather than doing anything else. But as always, being rather sad and unidimensional, this is actually about malaria. And you probably have some familiarity with the life cycle of malaria. Just to point out that falciparum is a bit different, the one that causes all the trouble, to the other human malarias, in that it delays its sexual stage production, the asexual stages in the red blood cells, and there's a sort of delay before it really gets into producing the sexual stages, which are very readily recognizable. And it's those that are responsible, of course, for continuing the cycle in mosquito. These are the gametocytes of vivax, those are the gametocytes of falciparum. How many of these people got Nobel Prizes?
Alcohol. Golgi or something totally different. Oh, of course. Yes.
And right now I've got a lot. So these in those days, malaria got the very best scientists, and these were the very best scientists. And none more important, I think, in our understanding of malaria than the Roman school. So we have Malaria, who discovered the malaria parasite, Mahidol, the great pathologist, who with Bignami wrote the great book on autumnal fevers, autumnal fever, which described pathology of malaria. Shelley, the great public health proponent. Golgi, who famous for the apparatus, but in fact a great malariologist and discovered periodicity and its importance in identifying speciation. Malaria never accepted the fact that malaria had more than one species. The Italians were first to identify that. Grassi, who should have shared the Nobel Prize with Ross for transmission, and Manson, who suggested Ross should look in the mosquito, having been the first person to identify an insect vector of the disease when he discovered that in Amoy in China that mosquitoes transmitted filariasis. So, on the 6th of November, in French North Africa, in Constantine, Algeria, Lavarin noticed something very peculiar in the blood cells of the patient presenting with fever, with ague. And these drawings are pretty clear what he was seeing. He was observing exflagellation of gametocytes.
osservano i corpuscoli di calore nel sangue di alcuni pazienti italiani, riconoscono come stati del ciclo di sviluppo del parassita e attribuiscono un nome generico all'organismo Plasmodium.
It won't be the last. So, the first description of the ester autumnal, the dangerous, the killing malaria, and the recognition of speciation, and then
Scopre che differenti specie della donna sono responsabili di tipi diversi di febbre intranutrienti.
so
Malaria
I don't need to say any more. Couldn't have been said better. And Golgi, he noticed that the different periodicities, because in those days, as opposed to now, in those days you didn't treat malaria, now we do, different styles of doing things. So malaria was characterized by the periodicity of its fevers, and people were able to identify quartan pattern, which is this is the Greek system of inclusive reckoning, where you take one as the first. So 1, 2, 3 days, but actually 3 days, but because one is time zero, it's actually called quarter. It's rather confusing. The older members will remember these in textbooks and seeing fever charts and so on. We don't see this today because, of course, we treat malaria and we stop it happening. But it was Golgi who realized that these fever spikes corresponded with this process of schizogeny, where the schizons synchronously release the merozoites and other intracellular material, and it was now it's a cytokine-proton response to that synchronous release of foreign protein material into circulation, which gave regular fever spikes. And cannot resist recommending this again. So 2 years after they wrote it, it was translated into English. It's absolutely brilliant. It really identifies most of the key features of the pathology of malaria. We haven't affected that to this day. But they did notice also that the crescent shape, the gametocytes, were more abundant in the spleen and bone marrow than in the viscera. 1894. But that didn't stop it being rediscovered 120 years later and published in Science Translational Medicine. Without, by the way, a reference to this somewhat earlier recognition. So the key message here is that go back into the old literature, because you can probably publish stuff again and nobody will know. Inami postulated that the malaria parasites were transmitted during feeding, and shortly afterwards, Ronaldo Rossi in Secundabad, having been inspired by Manson, makes the critical observation of these cystic or ovoid cystic structures in the gut of the dapple-winged mosquito, which we now know to be the Anopheles. But he was transferred, moved away from Secundabad to an area without malaria, and he wasn't able to complete the cycle until he went to Calcutta, where he did it in bird malaria, not in human malaria. But it was the Italians who demonstrated it in
il ciclo completo del plasmodium nella malaria umana, ed anche che la trasmissione specificatamente dipendente dal zanzara del genere Anopheles. Anyway, it's Ignami.
So, Osler, remember him? Yeah. Osler, the leading physician of his day, British professor of medicine in Oxford, died of empyema in the Spanish flu. The luminous emblem of the Orient stares one in the face so that a mistake is impossible. One who fails to recognize a crescent when he sees it should wear a crown of thorns and bear a cross of gold. We don't do enough of that these days. Anyway, Thompson, who was one of Ross's first students, with Ross, was very interested in the relationship of gametocytemia to asexual parasitemia. And here you can clearly see that the peak of asexual parasitemia precedes, by some 7 to 10 days, the peak in the crescent, the gametocytes. So you have a wave of asexual parasitemia followed by a wave of crescents. And that in untreated malaria, and actually most malaria in terms of human infection is in people who are walking around untreated because they are asymptomatic. You have these waves of asexual stages, largely determined by antigenic variation, and these are followed by a corresponding wave of gametocytes. And because the ratio changes, and because gametocytes are cleared more slowly from the blood, the portion of gametocytes to asexual stages increases and may actually exceed that of the asexual stage. The first, at a stage 1 gametocyte, you'd be hard put to distinguish that from an ordinary ring form on a peripheral blood film. Then they disappear and they sequester, like the asexual stages, but as was pointed out, in different organ distributions is really important. And they don't really appear until they're stage 5s here. But it's very important to note that the first part of that wave, when they come out and they're hiding in the microvasculature, they're not yet infectious. So the young stage 5s are not yet infectious. This explains the large discrepancies observed in clinical studies between infectivity and gametocytemia. So here are some there's a lot of variation, as you can see, in the estimation of the time they spend sequestered, how long they live in the circulation, and the ratio, which varies enormously. But the density of gametocytemia is important because although probably everybody with falciparum malaria has gametocytemia, you've got to have one male and one female tango, and therefore the mosquito's got to pick up at least one male and one female, as we'll see in a minute. The ratio is not equal. So that does put a physical limitation on the density that can transmit. Now, there are still debates as to whether the proportion of gametocytes in the skin vessels is different to that elsewhere. But it still puts a limit. Now, does anybody know how much a mosquito drinks? Nearly everybody has performed this experiment. So you had, and many of you are scientists, so we had an offer of 1 microliter. Do I hear? 1 milliliter. 1 milliliter. 1 litre. I've got 1 milliliter, 1 microliter, nanopentaliter. Well, 1 microliter is pretty good. Because that's what it takes. So you need 1 male and 1 female gametocyte in that volume to transmit. In fact, because of the ratio, being more females than males, you're going to need more than 2 on average. So it's a very stochastic relationship, and there's a lot of interesting probability distributions in it. But the point is, there's got to be enough gametocytemia to transmit malaria. Some of the mosquitoes are big, but some of them are very small. Where I work, one of the important vectors is Anopheles minimus, and the name is a clue, and they're very small, and they probably don't even drink 1 microliter. Who transmits? Fascinating question. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but just to point out several things. One is that gametocyte counts are lower in acute malaria than asexual stages. We know that, but they vary a great deal, and they vary dependent on many things. And these are just 2 of them. Transmission intensity, anemia is an independent covariate. People who rarely get treatment, so we work on the Thai Myanmar border, and there, in refugee camps and clinics, people are very quick to go and seek treatment. So we have a 3% rate of microscopically detectable gametocytemia. Frank Smithhouse in the kind state in the West with terrible access to treatment, the rate was 30%. So very, very variable rates of gametocytemia. And he will introduce Field, great malariologist. This is another cracking book, if you ever get the chance to read it. And he together with Shute was Ross's technician, and actually was the man that coordinated the malaria therapy, the provision of mosquitoes for malaria therapy in the UK, from Walden Hospital in Epsom. And became a really important malariologist, and we'll see a bit more of him in a minute. Now, not surprisingly, with microscopy, you're just picking up the tip of the iceberg. So if you have more sensitive methods, and here we have molecular methods, you will detect higher rates of gametocytemia. And here he is. Here's the man, and there's Ronaldo Rossi, and Shute did some beautiful work on a lot of the laboratory techniques that we've used today, involved with his work. Great work on microscopy. But there's an important point, and that is that although in laboratories you can make mosquitoes you can have them absolutely solid viruses. In fact, in the field, it's pretty rare to find mosquitoes which are infected anyway, inoculants. We spent 4 years in Mahidol refugee camp and found one. So really low, but the median number of viruses is low too. So that's quite important when we come to understanding transmission dynamics, which we're not going to do today. But the relationship between gametocyte density and infectivity is obviously sigmoid, like everything in life, but it's extremely variable at the individual level. But you can see that once you get to very low densities, as I pointed out, you're not going to be able to infect. And it saturates, obviously, at high densities. Right, slight change in tack now. This guy is thought to be the father of chemotherapy, and he introduced, he had the idea of the magic bullet, of that chemicals could treat microorganisms. He introduced salvarsan, transdermal infection, and he was the first person to use a synthetic antimalarial drug. And that synthetic drug is methylene blue, which anybody here who's done a microscopy staining of anything has used, because it's in almost all states. It's also it's useful now for sterilizing fish tanks. It's used if you want to escape the colorimetric test for amphetamines, that it makes the urine blue, so it screws that up. It's used in ICU, as you know. It's used in all, still used very widely, but it is antimalarial. And here is a mixture of quinine, which is, some of you may have heard of, antimalarial drug, gin and tonic, that sort of thing, and methylene blue, made by TP Drug Laboratories. It's Sukhumvit Road in Bangkok, which doesn't exist, by the way, very interesting that they make it. But they have quinine and methylene blue. Two things that definitely work on malaria. Slightly tilted, that's the quinoline structure, that's quinine, and this is methylene blue. And knowing that those two molecules work in malaria, brilliant German chemists at the first part of the 20th century said, let's try and hybridize these two molecules and produce something which has the properties of both. This is the Eberhard Laboratories of Bayer, and this is Rowe, who probably introduced the first high-throughput screen in the drug industry, and he did it in canaries and then sparrows with malaria. So he used bird malarias as a screen for antimalarial drugs, and they started to screen compounds which seem to have the properties of both methylene blue and quinine, and they came up with a compound which was called Plasmodium, which, if you're American, you would call Pamaquin, and if you're British, you call Plasmodium. It has several similar names. It was the first synthetic antimalarial drug that went to scale. Methylene blue really wasn't good enough. It's an 8-aminoquinoline. Rowe identified that it had different profile of antimalarial activity against the bird malarias. It was produced. Here is a picture of it. It's an 8, not a 4-aminoquinoline. It has a terminal diethyl group. We'll come back to that in a minute. It's actually used in a fixed combination with quinine. So it was, interestingly, the first fixed combinations started in the 1920s. Now this cheerful chap, anybody recognise him? He got the Nobel Prize. This is Plasmodium, the Viennese neuropsychiatrist who discovered that fever could cure syphilis. And the best and simplest way to give fever was to give malaria. So malaria therapy became the treatment of choice for neurosyphilis. Neurosyphilis, by the way, 10% of all people in mental hospitals in the first half of the 20th century had neurosyphilis. It was enormous, as you know from history. And so this actually worked. I mean, about 20% were really cured, and another 40% beneficial. And we learned more about malaria than we will ever learn about any other organism. Man was the experimental animal. There's one strain, the Madagascar strain of B. vivax, that went to 22,000 different people. So we have one organism in 22,000 people. This is Scioli. Scioli led the group in Hamburg that did the clinical evaluations of the drugs. He was the first person, by the way, to evaluate chloroquine. Ever heard of chloroquine? They decided it was too toxic for human use, sent back to the lab, and they developed methylchloroquine, and that was the drug that the Germans used. But Scioli was very important in his early evaluations. And Rowe again, not just treating canaries, but now humans, they did, within 2 years of the development of the drug, they did clinical trials. They went to Spain. And this was the good old days where you actually gave the name of the patients and how old they were and probably their address. And of course this chap has syphilis, so that's also quite useful to know. But the important bit here is this. There's not a very good response to this drug, plasmodium. Let's take it a bit slow. These are the asexual stages, the rings. But look, the crescents stop earlier. That was the first patient ever treated with plasmodium, at least according to the reports. So that the effect on crescents was greater than the asexual stages. And here's a more extreme example. The crescents stop here, the asexual stages continue. It really wasn't very good against asexual stages, but it was good against sexual stages. Now, plasmodium was okay, but largely stimulated by the second World War, the very high rates of relapse and vivax malaria, better derivatives were developed. So if you see there's a diethyl group here, just put hydrogens there and you get a drug called primaquine. So strangely enough, the simple drug took some time to come out, but it was safer and more potent. Go back a bit. Very early on, it was realized that these drugs were incredibly potent at blocking gametocytes, but also actually in transmission experiments. So in those days, they went the whole hog. They tested the infectivity of these parasites to mosquitoes. Again, name, address, whether they liked beer, how heavy they were, everything. So here you have 2 centigrams, which is 20 milligrams of plasmodium. And here you have mosquito dissections, percentage of mosquitoes infected, 100% halt straight away. Small dose stops it immediately. It's a common theme in studies at that time. So it was clear that these drugs weren't very good against asexual parasitemia. The vivax story I leave behind, but they were very potent at killing crescents and stopping them transmit. This is from the Fairley's group in Cairns, who a lot of the biology of malaria, a lot of it you can trace back to Marshall Bignami, but Fairley made very large contributions to how long sporozoites live in circulation and so on. So these volunteers were infected, and this is a single patient studied by McCarrett, who was the entomologist working with Fairley and Ercol, and it's a 10 milligram dose of plasmodium, a really low dose. This is less potent than plasmodium, remember. Gametocytemia doesn't change over 24 hours. The number of oocysts in mosquitoes comes down, and the infectivity, actually, in terms of sporozoic production, remember, the oocysts sort of produce the sporozoite, even more potent. So really potent, but a major dissociation between gametocytemia and infectivity. Now, the most extreme study ever done was by Riedman. Nobody ever repeated these. There are 2 papers on this. What they did was that they took volunteers in the Joliet prison in Chicago, and they were volunteers, and these people had infections, they infected them some time back, and then they studied transmission potential. And they looked to see whether these people could produce oocysts in the mosquitoes that bit, whether those mosquitoes would then go up, those oocysts would make parasites, and then what they did, which nobody else did, was they got some of those mosquitoes and infected another volunteer. So they actually proved whether they were infectious or not. And you can see that sulfadoxine pyrimethamine doesn't do very much. But primaquine certainly does. So primaquine very quickly sterilizes. It doesn't take away gametocytemia very quickly, but it rapidly sterilizes. But of course, primaquine alone doesn't treat the asexual parasitemia, and if you carry on, more gametocytes will be formed later on and you will get infectious again. So bottom line, 8-aminoquinolines very rapidly sterilize, and they do that a lot more quickly than they affect gametocytemia, and there's another case. Okay, so very roughly we've got this idea that all drugs will kill the younger gametocytes. Artemisinin will actually take out fairly mature gametocytes, but a very mature stage 5, only the 8-aminoquinolines or methylene blue will do that. And that just makes the point that if you only have a few to start with, you don't need to knock it down so much as if you have only a lot to start with. Right. We were able to show that artemisinins had quite a big effect. I won't take you through this, but we're just comparing in a very large number of patients. These are the reasonable numbers. There are 3,600 patients, so that's reasonable to make some conclusions. And these are the relative risks of carrying gametocyte. Bottom line, artemisinins reduce gametocyte carriage. But if you've got mature stage 5s, when you present, it can't kill those. So, yes, it will stop making gametocytes, and it will take out young stage 5s, but if you've got gametocytemia, it's not going to stop that. And there's more evidence of the effect of primaquine on gametocytemia. So, the key question, which we're coming to in about half an hour, is are males more sensitive than females? This is a summary of all data on what we really want to know, which is what is the effect of drugs, 8-aminoquinolines, on infectivity. And I summarized all those data, and these are the individual patient data. So the individual study, patients studied before they got the 8-aminoquinolines, 24 hours later. Almost no effect yet on gametocytemia, a profound effect on infectivity. I wasn't aware at that time, but subsequently I got the data from Professor Lee Jo-Kwon, who was the first clinician to evaluate artemisinins. Heard of him? Yeah, so he is the grandfather of artemisinins, and he did 2 studies, one in Vietnam and one in Cambodia, large studies where he looked at infectivity, dose-response relationships. So I pulled all the data, his data and everybody else's. The red circles are people who got primaquine alone usually, so no effect on the asexual state. And the green circles are ACT, artemisinin formulation treatment, plus primaquine. And you can see that quite low doses have a substantial effect. And that was on oocysts, that's the eggs in the gut of the mosquito. This is on the sporozoites and the salivary glands. And if you measure 48 hours afterwards, which is probably the best time to measure it, you can see that there really is a very potent effect. And that's a summary of that. That's the dose of primaquine that we have been recommending to stop transmission. This is the new low dose that we recommended largely as a result of these data. A 0.25 milligram per kilogram dose, definitely safer, and we felt a considerable margin to say that it would still have the maximum effect. And that was reviewed by an evidence review committee of the World Health Organization and went into policy in October 2012. A single 0.25 milligram per kilogram base primaquine dose should be given to all patients with parasitologically confirmed falciparum malaria. And that's what we would like to happen, because we are in a serious doo-doo situation with artemisinin resistance. Now, let us turn to the Cochrane Cochrane, yes, Cochrane collaboration, and what they thought of that. So this is the Cochrane collaboration, Trusted Evidence, Informed Decisions for Better Health, a very influential body. They actually have a seat on the World Health Assembly, and they provide the opportunity for us to significantly influence, unfortunately statistically limited, the way research evidence is created and used by the WHO. And indeed, they are influential. What did they think of the low-dose primaquine? Well, they just reviewed it for the second time, and they didn't like it. So, these are the author's conclusions. Current policy recommendations at 0.25 mg per kilogram primaquine should be added as a single dose primary treatment for positive malaria, blah, 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 based on judgments and inferences rather than reliable evidence of the effects of this dose. Oh dear. Why did they reach that conclusion? Well, let's start with so they divided their evidence into two sections. One, primaquine with artemisinin-based treatments. They didn't like any of the mosquito feeding stuff. They only were interested in gametocytes. And the key thing was that they only found one trial evaluating the low-dose category, and that did not demonstrate an effect. So, no wonder they didn't like it. Oh. What was that trial? Well, I had a slight vested interest being that person in this trial, and because I seem to remember it did have an effect. So this is what the trial was basically set up as a non-inferiority trial. She, as the Ebola led it, it was done in Uganda, and here we see what most of us would recognise as a dose-response relationship. This was the previously set non-inferiority bound, and the way this was analysed was to ignore this completely and just, the Cochrane collaboration, just compared those two things, which is obviously incorrect. This is a series of data. All data are informative. That's clearly a dose-response relationship. You would look at that, you would say, well, 0.25 should be somewhere in there. Can't be confident about that, but given that it's a fairly large group of patients, to say that that is evidence of no effect, I think is misleading. It's different from saying it's evidence of an effect, but to say this proves there's no effect, and to use that to give a thumbs out to WHO recommendation, I think is a basic statistical error. And here we have if you look at the dose-response relationships out here, for the different doses, you can see there's clearly a dose-response relationship. What about the other study? There were two studies that this family indictment was based on. One added to all the treatments for malaria. Two studies showed that primaquine at high doses, blah, 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 blah. But a single study of the currently recommended 0.25, no effect was demonstrated. Very low quality evidence. Well, that's funny because I seem to remember that one as well. And this is what we said. We said combinations containing primaquine resulted in significantly shorter gametocyte clearance times. Blah, 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 blah. So this is queen alone, gametocyte clearance times, that's the tetracycline, which shouldn't make much difference. And these are the clearance times with primaquine. Well, I think you can see that these ones are slightly different to those ones. In fact, more than slightly, they were significantly different. There's no difference between those two groups. What did they say? They said, comparison with 216 hours to 48 hours with 0.5 or 87 with 0.25, although results were not presented in a form that could be shown graphically. The problem is that they got these the wrong way round. They misread this. Actually, the greater effect was seen with the lower dose, but they had that, they just simply read it wrong, and came to the wrong conclusion. The other thing that they liked was the day 8 gametocyte for some reason. And they said the single trial using low-dose primaquine did not demonstrate a difference between the groups on day 8 gametocytemia. And here is the evidence that it did not. The only problem with this was that we never measured gametocytemia on day 8. At all. So, What we did do was report the proportion of people who developed gametocytemia after treatment, but certainly not on day 8. In fact, these were the data. So that was just fabricated. So, the WHO revised recommendation appears to be based more on concerns about safety and non-proven efficacy. And the 2 controlled studies which have evaluated doses below the point bar failed to demonstrate reliable effects. Well, that's incorrect in the first and incorrect in the second. Trusted evidence, informed decisions, better health. What the Cochrane collaboration like is gametocyte carriers, and they particularly like the area under the curve. They also like gametocyte clearance, they also like gametocytemia on day 8. This, I think, is wrong, and here are several rather boring reasons why it's wrong. First is an easy one. The higher your parasitemia, the longer it takes to clear. That's obvious. So, without taking your initial gametocytemia into account, a clearance time or an AUC, which is strongly influenced by that, has a major confounder. If you mix microscopy and more sensitive measures, you're mixing apples and pears. QT NAFTA, which measures PFS25 mRNA transcripts, is more sensitive, so you get a different value. We don't know how rapidly dead gametocytes are cleared, but we know that infectivity is much quicker, it is reduced much more quickly than gametocytemia. The AUC obviously weights time and density equally. That's stupid. There's major dissociation, and well, it's all self-evident. I'm going to read it for you. Let's go right back to the beginning. There he is. That's what he observed: gametocytemia, and he looked at exflagellation. Now, strangely enough, this is where you come in. Males and females are different. You may have noticed that. Firstly, the females are more predominant. There are more female gametocytes than males. And the reason for that is that each male gametocyte will produce 8 microgametes. So, 8 wiggly things from one male. So, you've got 3 to 5 females for every one, but the one is going to produce 8. We got there in the end. And according to some very nice research, and it's very nice that Andrea, who's the second author here, is present, from Imperial College, no, they have not yet identified, correct me if I'm wrong, any compound to which female gametocytes are more sensitive than that. The males are always more sensitive. So the males are less and they're more sensitive. And you can see where this leads you when you're thinking about gametocyte clearance. The other feature, which is quite important, is that the QT NASPA, which is a mRNA quantitative measure, based on the PFS25, it is probable that the PFS25 is purely a female transcript. So you're only, if that's true, certainly you can't find the PFS25 protein in the males. Can't be absolutely sure, but Andrew will doubtless find out soon whether there is transcription, the transcript is formed and then degraded in some way, but it seems highly unlikely that the male transcribes PFS25. So all that QT NASPA stuff is measuring females. So you can see you start with more, and they are less drug sensitive. So you'll have, this is hypothetical, but the idea is, and I think it's highly likely, that males are cleared more rapidly. And this study, of course, is based entirely on females, which is considered high quality evidence by the Cochrane collaboration. That's it. So look, this is the conclusion. It's the only one. No, wake up now. This is the only one you need to remember. You have a dissociation between gametocyte clearance and infectiousness in mosquitoes. Primaquine is more potent in reducing infectiousness than it is in reducing gametocyte clearance. Weak site clearance reflects females, and if it's a female-only transcript, then the QT output only measures females, but infectiousness is determined by the more sensitive partner, which is the male. That's it. Thank you very much.